Matt Park and Ivan. I don't want to pronounce your last name.
Just call me Ivan.
But thanks very much for coming. This is a great turnout. Just a quick question: how did you find out about tonight's meetup? Was it through email, or did you guys check the meetup page, or through a friend?
Email.
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 Okay. Was that the right amount of email?
Hands up.
Email. Another Slack group.
We've triangulated.
Knocking on your door, your house. Hey, there's a meetup.
Okay, cool. Well, what we're doing is working. Yeah, thanks very much for coming out. Really happy to be here. Thanks very much, Quinn, for raising your hand and expressing interest in hosting us.
Yeah.
Tonight, Quinn's going to be talking about, let's see. Enumeration, building protocol, and power.
Yeah.
But yeah, Quinn's an iOS developer here at TextNow. You've been here less than a year?
Less than a year, yeah.
You guys are growing rapidly, so everybody kind of stay tuned, keep posted what they're doing. Maybe we can start just by telling us a little bit more about TextNow, what you guys are all about, and we can get into the talk.
Sure, yeah.
Thanks very much.
Yeah, so for those of you who don't know, TextNow is a messaging service. It's really a freemium VoIP service. So what that means is basically we give you a number and you can talk and text from it for free. And one of our side of the business is that freemium side, and the other side is the wireless. So the wireless side would be offered only in the States currently. We're working to get it in Canada. Would be you basically buy a data network. And instead of using the talk and text on the phone, you would use the talk and text through TextNow. So that's where the voice over IP thing comes in. Yeah, so that's pretty much the TextNow platform in a nutshell. I am Quentin Price, as you probably all know. I'm an iOS developer at TextNow, as you also probably know. For those of you who don't know, I am also part of the onboarding group. It went out in the email, but I'm part of the onboarding focus group. So what that basically means is I work on bringing users from point A to their first conversion, which is either making their first phone call or making their first text. So some of the projects that we have coming down our pipeline in the onboarding focus group is things like tutorials. When a user gets to the home screen, we want to know, the user might not know how to make their first call or might not know how to make their first text. So tutorials. We're working on adding different ways to sign in. So things like social sign-on, like Facebook and Google. That seems to be a big proponent in a lot of the top apps out there. And we compete with them by adding that to our app and improving it constantly. So by improving the user experience, we want to run experiments on users. And what we like to use is A/B tests. And if you don't know what that is, it's where we basically show user A the blue screen and we show user B the red screen. And we track how user A uses the app and user B uses the app. And to track those kinds of things, we might see if we show user A the red screen right off the bat, they might make their call a little bit quicker, or they might convert on better odds, right? There's a better percentage of users who saw the red screen that actually made their first call. In order to track those kinds of things, we need to have analytics on those actions, right? So either clicking the create account button, actually completing the create account process, and making their first call or making their first message. And to do that, we use analytics. And what we've done, we've had a little bit of trouble juggling our analytics, and what I've done is I've built an analytic framework. And I'm going to walk you through how I did that. But before we get started, does anyone have any questions about about text now or about onboarding? Yep.
How old is the company?
10 years.
10 years, yeah, just over 10 years.
10 years, and we've only taken on $1 million of seed funding in 2011.
Thank you.
And the app is about 10 years old too, but it's on its fifth rewrite, so.
Yeah.
Yep, so when you talk about analytic frameworks, this is your own proprietary analytics versus maybe an intercom, like intercom or something like that?
So we have developed this from the ground up, and we're hoping that sometime in the future we can make this an open source project for the community. Yeah.
Is it cross-platform as well?
Right now it is only written in iOS, yeah. Swift. Yeah.
As far as I remember, around 2 years ago, Apple actually enabled a VoIP, some VoIP framework. Did you guys get any help from Apple, since like VoIP is your primary function? Did you guys get any help from Apple, help like to include that framework in your app?
So I wasn't personally here when that happened. I would say I would defer that probably to our calling expert, Matt Hill, if you care to.
Are you talking about CallKit?
Yeah.
Dropped in iOS 10? No, not really. So they dropped CallKit for most of it, like just in iOS 10, and then if you're a developer that uses VoIP, you get benefit out of it, so you no longer have to use APNS and then forthright distribution and stuff. So it's more of a nicety for that we got. It's not like we received help from Apple or anything.
Because as far as I remember, I was working on VoIP app, and for a while the documentation was like totally wrong, and
Yes.
it was a big struggle to enable that.
Yeah.
So you did not get any help.
No.
Any other questions? Cool. All right, we'll jump into it. So for those of you who don't know what analytics is, I'm just going to go over how we use analytics at TextNow and just sort of what analytics in general is. My definition for analytics is collecting data that describes how users use the app. And at a very high level, that is pretty much what analytics is. One of the tools that we use at TextNow is LeanPlum. LeanPlum gives us a little bit more than just analytics. So it lets us track when user clicked that create account button. It also lets us track when user made their first call. And we use it for the bulk of our analytics. But it also gives us things like in-app messages and push notifications and interstitials that doesn't take developer time to actually install. One of the other tools that we use is Adjust. At TextNow, the freemium service, we have ads in our app for the free version. And some of the problems with ads is ad fraud. So when MoPub or Google gives us an ad and we say, okay, well, here's the ad and it was shown, a couple months down the line, if Google or MoPub find that that ad was shown fraudulently, they actually take the money out of our account. And that's a big problem as far as monetization is concerned. So tracking that kind of thing is really important for us. And Adjust is also all unauthenticated data, the way that we use it. So it just gives us a grand picture on how the users are using the app. The third framework that we use is Fabric. We use Fabric for developer metrics, and it's good when you need to track a specific state that a user gets in. For some reason, it's crashing at some part in the app, and you want to try and track some of the things, and you want to know how users are actually getting to that point. And that's how we use Fabric in our app. A little bit of quick and dirty metrics. Now I'll give you a real-world example. I've sort of already talked about this, but just to give you a little bit of an image on how we would use this and how it would come in through our dashboard that, let's say, LeanPlum would supply. We have our sign-in app here. And let's say we have the login with Facebook, we have the sign in, and we have the create account. Well, that's pretty good. Users are using the flow, users are creating accounts, sending messages, and we're able to track when they make their first call. But sometimes what we want to do is we want to perform some A/B experiments. So how can we improve that flow? How can we get the user to go from point A to point B a little bit quicker? So if we track when the user clicks that sign in button, and then we track when the user clicks that first call button, the time in between those two events can be shortened, and we can measure that. So let's say we add another button, and that's Google sign in. So can you see that? Is it, yeah, okay. So Google sign in. So let's say we can now connect with Google. That's great. Maybe users that are trying to log in here didn't want to sign in with the regular email, and they didn't have a Facebook account, but they do have a Google account, and it's fairly straightforward to log in. All their information is saved on their app, and it was super simple. But maybe for some other users, they take a look at it and they go, oh, that's Facebook and Google, I don't want to give them all my information. And they get a little bit weary about it. And those are the things that we want to track. So let's show 50% of the users just the Facebook button, and the other 50% of the users the Google and the Facebook button. And maybe if that Google button takes off, maybe we can show another 50% of the users, or split one of the groups up, and show them just the Google button. And maybe that yields better results as well. Does anyone have any questions about that? All right.
What, is that the only, I'm sure there's other milestones, but that's interesting. So the time they sign up?
Yeah.
First call?
Yeah.
Like if you found that as soon as they do that first call, that the chance of them being a longer term customer are higher?
So it's, we track like 14-day retention. That's a big one. If they get to the 14 days and they're still using the app, it's likely they'll continue. Because we do give them a phone number. If you kind of think about it, we give you a phone number and you start using it, people are going to start using that phone number and texting you on it. So why would I go and install it? I might miss a text, right? Something like that. So if we can get users to that 14-day retention, it's very likely that we'll get them to actually continue using the app long term. Yeah. Yeah.
Have you guys started migrating from Fabric to Firebase yet? Because it's shutting down in the middle of 2019.
Yeah, no, we haven't yet. It's definitely going to be a project.
The Android team has. The iOS team will be now.
Thanks,
All
guys.
right, one of us. Yeah. Yeah.
What's your target demographic for this?
Specifically, I wouldn't know. I would probably point that off to someone in product that would look at that, or someone in our data science team. I know that the majority of our users are in the US. Yeah. Does anyone know that's here?
Are you asking about the app or about the analytics framework?
Talk about the app, because I think I used to use this app. I just had an iPod.
Yeah, a lot of, so the app initially started because like iPods you couldn't text, obviously. Oh yeah, I thought you were adding on. So, but a lot of teenagers and stuff still use the app because like their parents might give them a phone, but won't give them like a phone number or anything like that. Does that make sense?
That's just one of the demographics.
Yeah.
So I mean, we have a lot of people will download the app if they want a second phone number for business purposes. We have some international customers who will download the app because they want a North American phone number to use. We still have the use case of people, if they don't have a cellular plan and they want to just make calls over Wi-Fi because it's free, we'll download the app for that. And the fact that you can take this app and you can have the same number and you can use it on any phone or your desktop computer as well and make calls from that.
Question? Any other questions? Yeah.
And which exactly framework are you using for A/B analytics?
We use LeanPlum to do our experiments, yeah. Yeah.
So you mentioned that you use A/B test.
Yeah.
So can you control which part of users that use option A and which part use option B?
Yeah, so LeanPlum, not getting paid by LeanPlum, so LeanPlum gives you a lot of options, so you can actually, like, let's say they get into a certain state, so it also lets you track states, and if the user gets into a certain state, we can show 50% of those users some different screen, and we can test against that. So depending on even what events they're seeing, you can test on that. Yeah, it's pretty flexible.
Have you hooked up the analytics to your customer support, customer success function, or so that is that important to you? I don't know the business model, but do you have people that are paying extra for a level of support, and maybe there's a way that this data could be integrated with them to see where they're having issues or.
I don't know. That sounds like a great idea. Cassie, do you know anything about that?
No, it does sound like a great idea.
Is someone taking notes?
We do when we run certain experiments to get results. We have our premium customers who are obviously paying a monthly bill, or our wireless customers in the U.S. may have access to different features, and when we roll out experiments, we keep that in mind, and sometimes they're rolling out experiments specific to that segment of customers. But actually tying it back into our customer support portal might be an interesting avenue to consider. Sure.
Cool. Any other questions?
A bit off topic. How big is your iOS team?
We are 10 people. 10 people, I think.
Yeah. 2 co-ops, 10 probably full-time.
Eight full-time developers.
Yeah, probably.
We're always looking for enthusiastic iOS developers. We're interested in
It's a great time.
It's
Great time.
usually at the end.
Any other questions? All right. So we'll jump into the problem. So what is the problem? We've got multiple tools that we're using, and juggling them can be difficult for the following reasons. Number one is testing. It's difficult to know what event is going off to what tool and when. Mocking each tool as a whole is difficult. So if you have the multiple analytic trackers and you're trying to run some smoke test, getting all of the tools to dispatch to one log is difficult. And occasionally, events that you're sending from the user have some string. It always breaks down to a string. And those strings are always, they always have some acceptance criteria. For example, with adjust, adjust has their track event, and it takes an adjust event type. That type, if we dig into it a little bit more, is, can you guys read that? Can you read that? Oh, okay. Okay, all right. So it says track event with an adjust event, and then the parameter is called event. The adjust event is a type, and if we break into that type a little bit more, you'll see that if the event token is not 6 characters, we log an error, and that's all we do is just log an error. We do return no, but you know, console logs tend to get pretty polluted with stuff, and if you're not specifically looking for it, you might not know that your event is not tracking. And when you push that out to your release, you got to wait whenever the next release is, 2 weeks, a month, whatever, to actually get that event to track again. Another one of the problems is consistent event names. It's hard to know that event A in Lean Plum is the same name in Fabric. Third problem, view controller bloat. Trying to massage types, events, and extra data that you want to send along with your event can bloat up your view controllers, and it tends to get pretty ugly. Fourth problem and final problem is it's difficult to swap out tools. These tools end up getting riddled out throughout the code, and trying to extract them is difficult, and replacing them is even harder. So that's probably one of the main problems. Are there any questions with the problems that I've outlined here?
So when you embed those little scripts in your software, do you have to go to the various products, their dashboards, and read the analytics through their dashboard?
Yeah. So the data science team can probably get some reports on that. that's a little bit easier. But if I were to go check that my event was tracking, I would go to the dashboard and just ensure that it's coming from the development device. Any other questions? All right. So we've outlined some problems. Let's set some goals that we want to achieve with this framework. Number one, we want it to be simple to use. We want to easily be able to add or remove events. Shouldn't be a hassle at all. Along with simplicity, we want modularity. Eventually, we might want to use this in another application, and we want to be able to pull the whole framework out and drop it right in any application. We don't want overhead for new or existing events. As I mentioned before, it should be simple to use, but specifically, it's sometimes difficult to create new events because you don't know if they're going to track or not. The logging for it can sometimes fail silently, and you'll never know if it's going to track or not. It should be easy to swap out tools. That was one of our #1 problems. Our solution should be definitely generic enough that it can be used for any tool along with that. So testability, mockability. We want to be able to test our tools as a whole, and we don't want to be hassled by multiple analytic tools in our app. And our final goal that we're going to set here is minimize impact. We don't want to have our framework be a hindrance on the app's performance. We want it to be readable, we want it to be maintainable, and we want it to be extendable. Are there any questions with those goals that I've set out?
What do you mean by modular? The whole framework or components of it?
The whole framework. So you should be able to pull the framework out and use it implement it in any app.
And what do you mean by new events? What differentiates events between them?
So events would be, so separate events would be like login, create account. Those would all be separate events. They're just separate strings. Yeah.
Logging by Facebook and by Google.
Yeah,
they're different?
Those would all be separate events. You could also tag on, I'll get to this later, but a little bit of some parameters. It's just extra data that comes along with the event.
What tools do you mean the #4 there?
So those tools would be the analytic tools. So those would be at a bulk, Lean Plum, Adjust, Fabric, Firebase, Fabric. Yeah. Yeah, sorry.
Does cost come into your goals at all? Or?
Cost. So cost hasn't come into the goals. Are you talking about how much it's going to cost to track events to specific?
Well, yeah, the various services.
Yeah.
Some are more pricey and do different things.
Yeah, so no, it's not going to come into this right now. I think when you implement it, you should know what events you're tracking into what tool. It'll be fairly easy to know what events are going to what tool, as you'll see fairly shortly. And as a developer implementing it, you should know what the cost associated with each tool is, because they'll all be different. Yeah.
When you say testable, you mean automatic tests?
Yeah, so we should be able to run unit tests on these. Yeah. Yeah. All right. So we'll move on. I sort of made this UML diagram, and I realized that you probably won't be able to see it. And I put UML in quotes because I'm no UML expert, so I bet this is probably not the exact way that you're supposed to use a UML. But I sort of threw it together, and I thought, well, this sort of makes it a little bit easier to understand how you interact with the app and how the app is packaged. So I'll go through it quickly. I know you can't see it, but I'll read out everything. Yeah, sorry.
Could you, using on controls, scroll to the middle?
Scroll to the middle?
Just scroll.
Can I scroll on that? I'm not sure.
Use your track actually.
Yeah, control and fingers.
No.
Isn't that a setting you have to turn on?
Oh, yeah, I think it's on. It used to be on by default.
Yeah.
No, we can send the slides out.
That's okay.
Okay.
That's okay.
Sorry.
Wait, hold down command and do plus. So there's that one?
No. Command Shift.
Oh, I got an idea. Screenshot it and if you screenshot it, open the picture and then zoom.
There you go. We trust you.
Take 2 minutes.
All right.
Just hit space bar. Hit space bar.
I got you. Alright.
And now double click that. And bottom
There
right.
you go.
Did you see it?
Double click that. And
Okay.
now.
I don't think that one does work in zooming.
You
have to open it
You're
in
right.
preview.
You're right. It
Oh,
does.
yeah, sure.
Why?
Maybe we should turn on the accessibility options.
Yeah.
Alright, now the zoom is in.
There
Oh.
There we go. There's the view controller. Okay. All right. I'll try and do this. Okay. Okay. So we have our client here. For the most time, it is a view controller. It could be any class in your code, but for the most time, the view controller is the point that you're tracking events. So the view controller only interacts with the analytics class here. We have 2 methods in the analytics class. One to add event trackers, which are analytic tools. We are going to wrap that later. And we also have a method to track events. We call analytics events and analytics parameters. Analytics parameters, I'm going to explain a little bit more in-depthly later, but it's basically just data that you can send along with an event that you might need along with an event. So you can abstract a certain event to create account and then send along some data like create account with Facebook or with Google or with your email. So it interacts with the event tracker key class that is basically just a name that the analytics uses to know which tool each event is going to. The analytics event protocol, the analytics parameters protocol, and the event tracker protocol is all part of the package. So nothing is actually implemented for you. It is a blueprint on how you should implement it. And outside of here, you can see the implementations are on the app side. The event tracker is a wrapper on some analytic tool that you use, kind of like Lean Plum. I hope that I didn't just confuse you more with that diagram. I thought that it was sort of helpful, and I wasn't sure where to put it in the slides, so I put it here. Does anyone have any questions about that? I'm going to talk more about analytics events, analytics parameters, how we use the protocols, and how we set everything up in later slides. But does anyone have any questions about the UML? Okay, that's great. That's great. So I'll close out of this. Oh, look at that, seamless. All right, cool. So no questions, just to make sure. Okay, so we'll start our framework with the analytic tools. Analytic tools, if we really dig into them, they have 3 main components to them. They have supported event strings. As we saw with the adjust event, it could only be 6 characters. That's pretty unique to adjust. Most of them are just human readable strings, but they do usually have some character restrictions and some length restriction. They also have events. So events would be the string that you're sending along, like create account, log in, made first call, that kind of thing. And along with that, they also have parameters for the most case, for most cases. Parameters are always optional on any analytic tool. Parameters break down to be a dictionary of string to string, key value. This actually provides a lot of power to your tools because you usually get charged on the amount of events that you're tracking. So if you want to track 100 events, it's some price. If you want to track 300 events, it's some price. But let's say we can abstract that, create account with Facebook, create account with Google, create account with email, to just create account event, and then throw on the parameters on top of that. As well, you can send through problems with, let's say, a URL response, that the user's getting into some weird state and you want to send that off to Fabric as part of the event. So that's kind of the power behind parameters. Now that we kind of laid out what each analytic tool has, we'll get started with our first protocol. We're going to call this protocol event tracker. It's going to have the method track event with string and with the parameters string to string, the dictionary. That's going to be optional, as not all analytic tools have them, and the ones that do have them also have option for just tracking an event. Along with that, each tool has some supported strings. So we're also going to provide an external method, is event name supported. And this is just going to track if the event name is supported, and in the end we're going to assert if it's not, so that by runtime we know if that event is supported or not. And it's not just going to log something, but we're going to definitely know about it in our development build. Now that looks pretty good. Let's throw some code up, all right? So this is an actual adjust event tracker. This is one that we use in our code right now with our implementation of the analytic framework. We have our class. Can everyone read that? Yeah, okay, cool. We have our class adjust event tracker. It implements the protocol event tracker. So that means that it has to have the method track and it has to have the method is event name supported. And inside of this, it's pretty simple because we know that we're never going to get parameters. And if we do, well, that was a development error and we don't have to do anything with them. So basically what we're going to do is when we get that track call, we're going to track the event with the adjust event. And the external method is event name supported will be used by our analytics core that we're going to make. So these two methods will only be called by our analytics core. We won't actually be calling these from the view controllers. So the is event name supported for adjust, for example, is pretty simple because they have their own class. For other ones, it's not as simple. Some of them have some regex of, and some of them have some length that they can't exceed. But for this, it's pretty simple to just check if the adjust event, which returns an optional adjust event, the initializer for it, is equal to nil or not.
How well is that communicated, that what the restrictions on their parameters is? Is it part of like the API docs? Like, how did you figure that out?
I honestly had to dig into it. It's, if you like check the tooltip on the adjust event, I don't think it says it on it. So either that or my ID was messing up. So, yeah. So along with the event tracker, what happens if we want to track parameters? Well, we want to keep these as simple as possible. When we want to mock this event tracker, we don't want to think about the fact that the event could come in here and it could fail in here. So when we want a parameter, it's recommended that we implement it like this. We basically just unwrap the parameters. If they exist, we send it along to the adjust track event. Adjust actually doesn't have parameters, but if it did, this would be how you might implement it. And on the else case, obviously tracking the event. There's one more part for the event trackers, is each event tracker has to have some key associated with it so that the analytics core knows which tool to dispatch which event to. So we're going to make a really simple class, event tracker key, just so that we have that fully rounded implementation. And you can implement it with a struct. You can pretty much implement it any way you want. But this is one way that we implemented it, but it's not necessarily needed. Yes?
Is there a reason that you chose a stringly typed interface as opposed to, like for instance, if you go back to the event tracker protocol, you could have, for instance, had an associated type, which was an event type, and then you could hypothetically have like an enum where like one element is fabric, and then the parameter to that enum could be whatever event. Because then you could assert whether there's parameters or not parameters just by the type itself, rather than causing the implementers of the protocol to have to, figure that stuff out.
Yeah, so I did sort of think about throwing the type in the event tracker. I think it'll sort of make more sense when we take a look at the analytics events, why I didn't. But that is an option. I could have gone that way. I felt that this way made it a little bit more of a fully rounded solution, and you can understand that when you take a look at an event tracker key, what it actually is exactly, and the fact that if you ever wanted to make an event tracker that, let's say, didn't have a key, we were thinking about expanding this to maybe have some sort of wildcard event tracker, it would also have to be keyed, which could have been keyed with some wildcard key, but that is definitely an option. It was just this is the way that we chose to implement it.
I was just wondering if you had tried it and maybe hit the roadblock or something.
Yeah, so I didn't hit a roadblock. I had pondered which way I wanted it, and I started like putting it one way, and then I pulled it back out, and then I put it one way, and I think I just landed on this solution. But it is in constant improvement and not quite open source yet, so there is definitely some things that we need to work out first. Yeah, solidify. Yeah.
Is there a reason for limiting parameters dictionary values to be only strings? Because Fabric depends on what you pass there as a parameter, number or string. It displays them differently.
Yeah, so this was a good way. Fabric, yes, it has some different ways to display the different objects. This was a way that we can abstract even custom types. So one of the problems that we would have is that they don't know about my custom type message, right? Or text now message. And being able to unwrap that to a string, and being able to format it however we want to format it is a pretty powerful option for us. And we wanted to make this as generic as possible. Any other questions? All right. So we'll move on to our second protocol here. Arguably the biggest part of this framework, as for the most part you are just tracking events. We don't want to be pushing through strings from view controllers. It's difficult to swap out anything, and it's not very readable depending on what the event string is. So we're going to need a name in our event. And really there's not much else to it. So let's take a look at the second protocol here. So we have our protocol analytics event. It has the variable name that's a string, pretty basic. Now, I think that we can probably take this one, sorry. I'm going to show an example of how this might be implemented. Let's just think that, you read that? Let's just think that we are in our view controller and we want to track the event, my event. Sorry, that's text now. So we're trying to track the event, my event, and how would the tool know where to send it? We could do something like this, where the view controller goes, this is the trackers that I want to send it to, and you could send in some keys, some array of keys, and that is an option. But what we're trying to do, one of our problems was view controller bloat. So let's try and take that out. So what we'll do to take that out is, okay, you're not going to be able to see it, but what we're going to do is we're going to take it out with the supported trackers. So you can see at the bottom there, the supported trackers is basically just going to be a variable, and this is part of the protocol. I just, for whatever reason, it's not showing in here. So supported trackers is going to be part of the protocol. So this gives us...
It's the pizza.
Oh, it is the pizza. All right, here.
Pizza man.
Sorry, guys.
Never apologize for pizza.
Push for pizza.
was just complaining to Matt that my calls weren't coming in, but they actually are, so I must have had to like do not disturb or something. Yeah, so what I was saying about the supported trackers, we're going to implement that as another variable on our protocol. And this gives us a lot of power because our view controller no longer needs to dispatch which tool it's going to. It just says, I want to track the login. And depending on what that event has implemented, it's going to have the tools associated with it. So it's actually left up to the event to dispatch which tool it's going to by the keys. So an implementation of this would be in the enum. You could technically implement it however you want, but this is the recommended implementation. Through an enumeration, we can have our case launch, and we set the name to be whatever we want. In this case, it's launch. And in the variable for supported trackers, we can set which event tracker keys we want to send it to. This is a great opportunity to be able to mock these. You could set your lean plum events key to some mock event tracker and add that to the analytics core rather than adding the actual lean plum tracker. So does anyone have any questions about that?
I want to see how it looks in the view controller.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I do get to that later with the implementation.
Sure.
Yeah, yeah. Well, we're going to put some more pieces together and then we'll get there, okay? Yeah.
One quick question.
Yeah.
Have you considered that, so for example, here the events know which tool handles them, right?
Yeah.
Is there a benefit to doing that instead of doing the event receiver or the main tracker that you have to implement knowing which tool the event needs to go? So there's one thing that the event knows where it goes.
So you're saying the event tracker would know each event that it tracks?
Not each event that it tracks, but like the main implementation, like there are different buckets that you need to put in. So for example, I'm just taking a lot here, kind of a chain of responsibility design pattern. Like you don't know how to handle this event, you just pass it on to the next one and pass it on to the next one until you find the bucket that you can put it, and then you're done. Right?
Yeah.
So that way you wouldn't, the event would be basically oblivious to where it's going. Just like I'm just an event, I have the data that I need. I don't know what needs or who needs to handle it.
Yeah. Right? Yeah. That is an option. I haven't thought of that. That's a good point, and I'll definitely have to consider that with what we have right now. But the reason that we went with this is that we can now, with this, we should be able to mock any event tracker and be able to send that through with any event key. So you could mock the same event tracker and send it up with any key you want, or all the keys, so that you can always track to one spot. But I'm sure that it would work with your thought as well.
Can you dive deeper into that suggestion real quick? Explain it one more time.
So for example, right here, the event knows where it needs to go, right? But if you have an event that, if you treat an event as basically just a happening in the system, it's just a piece of data. It doesn't need to have any knowledge about what it does or how it works or where it fits, right? So that responsibility could be in an outside component. And then that component knows about the event.
Yeah, it could be generalized even more.
Yeah. Not in the general events you're saying.
Yeah. So basically, when you send the event to the event tracker, then the tracker, it's like, oh yeah, these handles or these trackers have been registered for this type of event. So it just goes and propagates. Another approach would be like cloud subsystems, when you can just subscribe to a specific event by the event type.
Yeah, like a notification.
So they all subscribe to that event type. Whenever you receive it, just publishes. And it would be a way to achieve something similar, right? Without adding extra knowledge to the event.
Yeah. It might be easier with this approach to actually see which events goes where with this approach.
Yeah, it's more visible.
Yeah, you can just open the event and
but then you have to complement visibility with separation of concerns.
Yeah.
Right?
So, I will say that for an app our size, we track thousands of events.
Mhm.
So it is, and some are in adjust, some are in lane employment, some are in both, and some aren't.
Mhm.
So it's like sometimes a product guy will come to us and say, are we tracking this? And we have to easily say like, yeah, it's in lane employment adjust.
Mhm.
Versus like them looking at the dashboard with millions of events, some legacy, some new.
Mhm.
Yeah, but good point, good point. We'll definitely have to think about that. That's
I do like the suggestion.
definitely a good suggestion, yeah. Thank you. Yeah.
Just a suggestion, you're kind of walking into a pet peeve of mine. So the problem, I've hit this 100 times on my own too.
Okay.
So when you're basically repeating yourself, you have to list all the cases with the general events, and then you list all the cases again in
Yep.
the name
Yep.
to return the string values, where if you just made the enum derived from a string as well, it automatically becomes raw representable. So case launch would equal launch.
Yep.
Case app update would equal update underscore app. And then even better, you can delete the name implementation, and you can extend analytics event where it is raw representable and whatever the type is a string, and then you have a default implementation for name,
Yep.
which just returns raw value.
Yeah.
And then boom, if you've got, like you said, thousands of events,
Yep.
you're like,
Yeah.
just got a lot. Nice.
The event names oftentimes don't correspond with their representable value.
To a string?
Yeah, it's usually like, so for example, create message event will be like, create dash new message, and then like sometimes it'll have like the place where it was sent, like what view controller it was sent from.
Yeah. So it has to be extended to something else.
Yeah.
Right,
Like
so those events don't have to be, but when you.
So yes, so this is one of the things with the framework. So this is just an implementation.
Right.
And you could implement it so that it's not your pet peeve. And that's a great suggestion for our implementation as well. We'll definitely take that away from that. Yeah.
Well, this also has code size issues as well.
Yeah, so so we like to break these with our current implementation of it, we break them up into multiple classes, multiple files, and it tends to be a little bit more readable that way. But I do see that with even like 20 events, you're like minimum 60 lines here, right?
Right.
So
we call something like new conversation events or like messaging events.
Yeah, yeah.
I like this. This is like group code review.
Maybe I shouldn't have showed so much code. Yeah.
Do you support sending for same events, sending separate names to separate event trackers? Is it supported in this implementation?
Separate events to separate event
Like
trackers.
let's say launch in adjust would be launch something, but in Fabric it would be just launch. Is it supported here? Because there are some.
So you would have to make 2 different events for that.
Okay.
Yeah. Any other questions?
Merge it.
Merge it. Ship it. It looks good. Okay. Cool. So we are getting there. This is our last protocol here. Parameters. We want to be able to design this for any type of data that's coming in. So tools have methods for tracking different types. As it was pointed out earlier, Fabric has options for printing out, like for example, the URL response maybe. It might actually take that type. But we want to be able to track any type that we want. And to some degree, those can all be broken down to what I mentioned earlier, the dictionary of strings. Okay, yeah. And this will be the required part of any analytics parameter, is our dictionary. So let's create the third and final protocol, analytics parameters. It's going to have the variable dictionary. It's pretty obvious, string to string. And the magic doesn't really come from the protocol. It comes from how we can implement it. So let's say we implement it with an enumeration. We have our case response error. And let's say we wanted to take that URL response as an object. And this could be any type. Just for the purposes of this demo, it is a URL response. Now we implement the dictionary, and we have the case response error. And in here, we can unwrap this however we want and display it however we want. So we don't have to worry about in the view controller unwrapping that type. We don't have to worry about how we want to display certain types of values. We can display it however we want. Maybe this could be a little bit of a block of code even. If we wanted to do some jumbling up of data before we send it off to our analytic tool. So that's where the power comes in here. And as you can see here, I'm actually unwrapping the URL response. And if it is empty, we can also we can make sure that we note that in the parameters. So yeah, as I mentioned, it adds the opportunity to track custom types. Usually in our view controller, we would have to massage those a little bit to be a type that the tool could track. And sometimes that can be a couple lines, 3, 4, maybe even 5 lines, if it is a complicated object. Does anyone have any questions about that?
Are you sure you want to take questions now?
Yeah, I'd love it, yeah.
No, I mean, just maybe it's better if they get after, then, you know, it's...
For I'll keep going. We only got a couple more slides here.
I feel like we are interrupting you all the time, so that's why.
No. I appreciate the feedback. We've already got some great suggestions already. So yeah.
For example, you separated the parameters from the events. Is that because there are some types of events that will never have parameters you don't want?
Yeah.
Or is it because there's some events that will have parameters in some tools and other tools will not have?
Yeah, so for example, adjust. There are no parameters.
Mm-hmm.
That would be a tool that doesn't have parameters, and in a lot of cases, we want to just send in the event. There isn't anything else like first call made, not a whole lot there that we could send in through parameters.
Mm-hmm.
That is just a state change for the user, yeah.
Then how do you keep track of which events need to have parameters for certain tools? Is it just in code, like enforcing the code?
Yeah, so when you track it from the view controller, you would outline what you actually want to track.
Mm-hmm.
And if you want to track the event, create account, and you want it to have parameters, you would send parameters through that.
So not all create account events need parameters?
No.
Okay.
Yeah, you're free to implement it however you want in your view controller. Okay. So I'm going to move on. If there aren't any more questions. Okay. So this is the Analytic Core. Can everyone read that? Yeah? Okay. So we've wrapped our tools. We've created our compile time safe events, and we also have created extremely flexible parameters. We're going to put it all together in the class Analytics. This will be the core of our framework, and I'm just going to come over here just so I can point out sort of what I'm talking about. We need some way to save what event trackers we've initialized. So, for example, if we wanted lean plum would be stored in here, in the event trackers, and it would be keyed by some key, some event tracker key. And we know that Analytics has these two methods that I mentioned earlier, track and add event trackers. Just to reduce exposure, we've made this setter for the add event trackers. And it takes a type and a tracker, and it basically just adds the event tracker. This is more where the error handling happens and the tracking actually occurs. So what we do is we iterate on the event's supported trackers. So as you remember, each event has supported trackers. Whether that is empty or not, we can catch that kind of thing in here, or whether the event tracker isn't actually initialized yet. So this is a common problem. Sometimes right off the bat you want to track that launch event. Maybe in some initializer delay that you've added to maybe speed up your app a little bit, you've delayed the initialization of, let's say, adjust, and you had the event tracking the launch, and it was never hitting, and no one really knew why, but with this you would know right away when that event hits that it wasn't actually tracking. because that event tracker wouldn't have been added to the framework. So that's one of the catches that we have here. Another one is checking if the event name is supported. So as we mentioned earlier, events have some supported name convention, and checking it before we track it and send it off to our tool to fail silently in some cases. We want to check if that event name is supported. And then we're simply tracking the event with the event name and the optional parameters that we've sent through. So it's pretty simple. There's not a whole lot to it, but it kind of drives the whole framework, and it is the motor of this framework. Does anyone have any questions about that? Yes?
So, because let's say, I forgot the name now, the
Event tracker?
No, the analytics one that you're using?
Yep, add event tracker.
Adjust, sorry.
Adjust, yeah, adjust, sure.
Now that one has very restrictive naming conventions.
It does, yeah.
So do you essentially have an entire separate set of events for it because you don't want to hamstring your names and the other services?
For adjust, yes.
Yeah.
We do have separate events for adjust. It's very restrictive because they're basically just codes.
Yeah.
That correspond
so
to
then,
some event.
if you have something that you want to track in adjust and something else, you basically log it twice with the two different types?
Yeah, yeah. So with that, you would, but for the most case, Analytic Tools aren't as restrictive as adjust. It's a little bit of a unique situation that they have, but for example, like Fabric and Lean Plum, they're just strings, and you'd usually just send through the same value.
Yeah. I just wonder if it would be worth it all. I mean, this kind of special case with adjust, but having some way for it to provide the same event, like alternate names depending on the service.
Yeah, that definitely would be cool if we could add that. It's something that we'll probably try and think about because we can see it in adjust, and maybe I can take some time and take a look at some other analytic tools and see if that's a convention across other tools. But yeah, thanks for the feedback. Yeah.
If the name parameter, or sorry, the name var, it became a function that took in an event key.
Yep.
Right. You could decide what name you want to return.
Yeah, definitely. That's
just fail.
Yeah. That's a good point. That's a good point. Thank you. Okay, if there are no other questions, I'm going to move on here. Get to that pizza. All right, implementation. All right, here we go. Okay, so we made the trackers, we made the events, we made the parameters, and we have the engine to drive it all. Let's see what we yielded here. So let's take a look at first what we do to initialize it. So in some initialization pattern, usually this is done in your app delegate, but really you can do it whenever you want. Maybe you only use a tool for a certain screen, and that's when you want to initialize it. But basically you're adding the event tracker with some key and the tracker that's initialized. In your view controller, however, what you would do with our URL response example, on that failure that is never supposed to happen, and the back-end team said, oh, it's never going to fail, it's never going to fail. Well, it failed, and we're going to track it, and we want that URL response to prove to that team that, hey, your endpoint failed, right? So what we're doing is we're going to go analytics, we're going to access that the shared singleton, and we're going to track the event with our service events, which would be the class or the enumeration that we made, and the response, which is the case. That could be any string. And the parameters would be service parameters.url with the URL response inside. This doesn't require any setup. It doesn't require any unpacking of that object. There's a lot of different things that object comes with, and we're just going to leave it up to our parameter implementation to deal with that. So does anyone have any questions? Cool. So let's go back to our goals and just make sure that we hit them all. Simple to use, as we just saw. I would say it's pretty simple to use. Would you guys say it was pretty simple to use?
Pretty straightforward.
Pretty straightforward, yeah.
9 out of 10.
Pardon?
9 out of 10.
All right, I'll take that. It's open source. or will
Bit of
be,
bad
hopefully.
seal of approval.
Okay. Definitely modular. It's extremely generic. I would say that there is no overhead for new or existing events. Swapping them around is super easy and super readable once you get into the enumeration. Being able to just swap out, say, okay, for this key now I want this tool in, and I want this tool in, and I want to put this mock in, and you can track whatever you want with any tool. So check mark on that. Testable and mockable, for sure mockable, we've been talking about that the whole time. Testability comes with mockability. And minimizing impact on the app, we definitely reduce the view controller bloat. One line, super readable event, tracking, yeah, talks for itself. Yeah, so that's it. Thank you guys for listening. I'd love for you to reach out to me on my email or on GitHub. I don't have much on there right now, but check me out and definitely give us a download. Check us out, see if you can actually use it. I use TextNow for my communication every day, and I'm loving it, and I hope that you can too. I'd like to thank Mark, my manager, and Cassidy, my director, for supporting me in hosting this event. Probably wouldn't have happened without them. And my team, who have talked mostly throughout this. You've heard them say a few words. The framework wouldn't have been put together or PR'd without them. So thank you to them.
Thanks very much, Quentin. That was awesome.
Yeah.
iOS Kiddo is supposed to be a place that's interactive and where you can be honest with each other, and show your code and get real feedback. And you took full advantage. It's amazing. Again, thanks to TextNow for hosting us. Again, providing a great space, great speaker, and sponsoring the refreshments as well. If anyone else is interested in being a speaker or hosting iOS Kiddo, let me know or talk to Ivan. We're really excited right there.
Yeah, and if some of you may feel like you're a little bit intimidated, and maybe you don't have the budget for snacks, we can work with that. So I work with Calendar. We can definitely sponsor snacks.
Yeah.
If you're willing to host. So
yeah, we actually have a space for April, early April. We don't have a speaker yet, so
yeah. If you want to speak, please let us know.
Yeah.
And
again,
2.0 comes in?
Go away and work with the code sometimes. That's great. This is awesome. Thank you very much.
All right. Thank you guys.